The first time my parents said no to me, I wasn't a child asking for a toy. I was a 30-year-old woman sitting on the freezing floor of my studio apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of a life I had spent a decade building. Unpaid bills, unopened mail, and a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing my lungs. I remember staring at my phone, the screen's glow, the only light in the room, waiting for my mother to say anything. Just one word that sounded like concern. Lila. She finally said, her voice as flat as a dial tone. We can't lend you $10,000. You chose a risky path. We can't step in every time things get hard. They say rock bottom has a basement, and I was living in it. Before the collapse, I was the successful one, the independent daughter, the one who didn't need checking in on. I ran a small consulting firm that I'd built from sweat and caffeine. For years, I was the pride of the family until I wasn't. A bad quarter turned into 3. Clients vanished like ghosts. Expenses didn't. I did everything the financial gurus tell you to do. I cut the cable. I stopped eating out. I sold my car and took the bus in the rain. I eventually sold the furniture I loved, the velvet armchair I'd bought with my first big paycheck, the oak table where I used to host dinner parties. I pretended it was a minimalist phase, but you can't minimalize your way out of a $10,000 hole when the rent is due and the lights are flickering. The hunger wasn't the worst part. It was the constant, vibrating anxiety under my skin. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart didn't just skip a beat, it tried to escape my chest. Was it the landlord? The bank? The collection agency? Desperation is a slow-acting poison. It strips away your pride until there's nothing left but raw, bleeding need. I drove to my parents' house on a Tuesday. I remember the gray sky, the way the wind whipped the dead leaves across their perfectly manicured lawn. I spent the entire drive rehearsing. Don't cry, Lila. Be professional. Show them the spreadsheets. Prove it's a loan, not a handout. We sat at the same kitchen table where I used to do my long division. It smelled of lemon pledge and expensive coffee. My father sat across from me, his arms folded like a judge. My mother stirred her tea, the silver spoon clinking rhythmically against the porcelain clink, clink, clink long after the sugar had dissolved. I just need a short-term bridge, I told them, my voice steadier than I felt. I laid out the paperwork. I showed them the contracts I had in the pipeline. 10,000, I'll pay interest, I'll put it in writing, I'll sign over my remaining assets as collateral. My father didn't even look at the papers. He didn't ask how I was sleeping. He didn't ask if I had food in my fridge. He just leaned back, exhaling a sigh that sounded more like annoyance than pity. That's not something we're comfortable with, Lila. We have other priorities. We have to think about your brother's future. He's at a delicate stage. Ryan, my younger brother, the golden boy, who was 32 and still finding himself on their dime. Ryan, who had crashed 3 cars and had his credit card debt wiped clean by them twice. I'm drowning, I whispered. It was the first time I'd admitted it out loud. My mother finally looked up, but her eyes were cold. You've always been so capable, dear. We figured you'd find a way. Besides, if we give to you, it takes away from the fund we've set aside for Ryan's milestones. It's about balance. Balance. That was the word they used to justify the scales always tipping away from me. I realized then that I wasn't a daughter to them in that moment. I was a bad investment, a risky path. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I just stood up, thanked them for the tea, and walked out. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching the lights go on in their warm, safe house, and I made a vow. I would never, ever ask for a drop of water from them again, even if I was burning alive. The next year was a blur of survival. I took jobs that were beneath me. I cleaned offices at 4 a.m. and answered customer service emails at 2 a.m. I lived on rice, beans, and the sheer burning spite that lived in my gut. Spite is a powerful fuel. It's cleaner than hope and longer lasting than anger. I disappeared from their world. I stopped calling. I stopped showing up for Sunday dinners. They didn't seem to notice. Why would they? The independent one was just doing what she always did, figuring it out. But as my bank balance slowly began to crawl out of the red, something else was happening. My heart was turning to stone. I was rebuilding my life, stone by stone. But those stones were reinforced with the silence my parents had given me when I needed them most. I didn't know it yet, but the delicate stage my brother was in was about to become a $500,000 problem. And my parents? They were about to find out that no is a word that cuts both ways. Success doesn't usually happen like a lightning bolt. For me, it was a slow, agonizing crawl through the mud. But by year 3, after the $10,000 no, the mud had turned into solid ground. I stopped answering customer service emails and started signing 6-figure contracts. I moved from that freezing studio to a high-rise with glass walls that overlooked the city. Sometimes, I'd stand there at 3 a.m. with a glass of expensive scotch, looking at the tiny cars below, and I'd remember the feeling of my stomach growling while I stared at a shut-off notice for my electricity. I never told my parents. When I visited for the holidays, polite, short, rare visits, I wore my old clothes. I drove a rented, mid-range sedan. I kept my voice quiet. Why? Because I knew them. If they thought I was struggling, they were distant. But if they knew I was thriving, they would be hungry. Then came the news. Ryan was getting married. My mother called me, her voice vibrating with a frequency I hadn't heard in years. Lila, you won't believe it. Ryan met her. Madison. Her family is, well, they're the Madisons. Real estate, old money, country clubs. They have standards. Lila. I sat in my plush office chair, listening to her gush about a woman she'd only known for 3 months. She talked about the wedding as if it were a royal coronation. Ryan hadn't held a job for more than 6 months in his entire life, but somehow, he'd landed a woman whose family owned half the zip code. That's great, Mom, I said, my voice flat. I hope he's happy. Happy? Lila, this is a transition. This elevates the whole family. We have to show them who we are. I should have caught it then. The we. The collective who we are. But I was too busy preparing for a board meeting to care. I thought my only job was to show up, wear a dress that didn't offend anyone, and leave before the cake was cut. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. It was my father. He didn't ask how my business was doing. He didn't ask about the cold I'd mentioned having last month. He didn't even say hello. Lila, he said, his voice commanding, the same tone he used when I was 10 and had spilled juice on the rug. We've been reviewing the wedding costs. To match the Madisons' contribution to keep Ryan from looking like a beggar in front of his new in-laws, we've calculated your share. I paused, a pen hovering over a contract. My share? Dad, I'm a guest. I'll bring a nice gift. But we need $500,000 from you, Lila. The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I actually laughed. A short, sharp sound. You're joking. You have to be joking. I am not joking, he snapped. We know you've been doing well. We saw that article in the business journal. Lila, don't play coy with us. You have the money. Ryan needs this. He needs to start his new life on equal footing. It's about family legacy. Equal footing? I stood up, walking to the window. Dad, when I was losing my business, when I was terrified I'd be homeless, I asked for 10,000. Not 500, 10. And you told me it was a risky path. You told me you weren't comfortable. That was different, my mother's voice chirped from the background, likely on the extension. You were just starting out. You needed to learn a lesson about responsibility. But this is Ryan's wedding. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this family to move up. So my survival was a lesson, but Ryan's ego is an opportunity. I felt a coldness settle into my bones, a clarity that was sharper than any anger I'd ever felt. The answer is no. The shift in my father's voice was instantaneous. The loving parent mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Listen to me, you ungrateful girl, he hissed. We sacrificed everything for you. We gave you the foundation to become who you are. If you turn your back on your brother now, if you humiliate us by making us admit we can't cover our side of the gala, then don't bother coming. In fact, don't bother calling. If you aren't with this family, you are against it. Then I guess I'm against it, I said, and I hung up. I expected it to end there. I was naive. Within 48 hours, my phone became a war zone. My Aunt Sarah left a voicemail crying about how heartbroken my parents were. My cousin sent texts calling me new money trash who forgot where she came from. But the worst was Ryan. He didn't call to apologize. He called to demand. Do you know how this makes me look, Lila? Madison's father is a billionaire. If my own sister doesn't contribute, they'll think we're frauds. You're ruining my life because you're jealous. Jealous of what, Ryan? I asked. Jealous that you've never had to earn a single thing in your life? Or jealous that our parents are willing to bankrupt their relationship with me just to buy you a bigger flower arrangement? You've always been dramatic, he spat. Dramatic. That was the word. The label they put on me whenever I had a boundary. I realized then that they didn't want a daughter. They wanted a silent partner with a deep pocket. I sat in the dark of my apartment that night, looking at the invitation. Thick, cream-colored cardstock, gold foil. It looked like a bill for a life I no longer wanted to buy into. I had 2 choices. I could stay home, change my number, and let them tell whatever story they wanted. Or I could show up, not as the selfish daughter they were painting me to be, but as the woman who had built her own empire while they watched her drown. I decided to go, not for them, but to witness the end of the illusion. I bought a dress that cost more than the $10,000 they had refused me years ago. I hired a driver, and I prepared my own gift for the wedding toast. Because if they wanted a drama, I was going to give them a masterpiece. I didn't go to the wedding to fix things. I didn't go because I hoped my mother would hug me and apologize for the years of neglect. I went because silence is a weapon my family has used against me for 3 decades, and I was done being the only one wounded by it. The venue was a glass cathedral of vanity. White orchids hung from the ceiling like frozen tears. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the kind of desperation that only old money can project. I arrived in a black car, wearing a dress of midnight silk that cost more than my father's annual pension. I didn't look like the girl who once lived on dry toast and spite. I looked like the storm they had forgotten they invited. I walked in alone. No one greeted me. No one pointed me to the family lounge. When I found my seat, it was at table 42, tucked in the back, behind a massive floral pillar, near the kitchen doors. My parents had placed me where the help wouldn't even notice me. During the ceremony, I watched Ryan. He stood at the altar, glowing under the soft amber lights, looking like a man who had never known the weight of a debt or the cold of a winter with no heat. Beside him was Madison, beautiful, polished, and completely oblivious that her fairy tale was being subsidized by the emotional bankruptcy of her sister-in-law. My parents sat in the front row. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father stood tall, his chest out, basking in the reflected glory of his son's social climb. I saw them whisper to Madison's parents, pointing at the grand decorations as if they had paid for every petal. I knew the truth. They hadn't paid. They were drowning in the pressure to look equal, and they had expected me to be the life jacket. Since I said no, they were swimming in a sea of lies. The reception was a blur of champagne and fake smiles. I felt the whispers before I heard them. That's her, the one who wouldn't help. So selfish, and look at what she's wearing. Then, the music stopped. The clinking of silverware died down. My father took the microphone. He stood at the head table, the lights catching the silver in his hair. He looked like the patriarch of a perfect dynasty. Family, he began, his voice booming through the glass hall, is the foundation of everything. We sacrifice, we build, and we carry each other. He paused, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto mine, hidden behind the pillar at table 42. But sadly, not everyone understands that responsibility. Some people get a little bit of success and forget the hands that fed them. They turn their backs on their own blood when it matters most. A cold murmur rippled through the room, heads turned toward the back, toward me. My father wasn't just giving a toast, he was performing an execution. It's a tragedy, he continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, to raise a child who values her bank account more than her brother's happiness. My heart didn't race. For the first time in my life, I felt perfectly, dangerously still. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the marble floor was like a gunshot. I didn't wait for permission. I walked toward the front. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I saw my mother's face go from triumphant to terrified in 3 seconds. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need it. My voice had been forged in the fires of survival, and it carried to every corner of that room. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Family is about responsibility, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the responsibility you had 5 years ago, when your daughter sat at your kitchen table and begged for a $10,000 loan to keep from losing her home. The room went so silent you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. You told me no. You told me I chose a risky path. You told me you needed to save that money for Ryan's milestones. I spent that year working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night while you paid for Ryan to find himself in Europe. I turned to Madison's family, and 2 months ago, when they asked me for $500,000 to pay for this legacy, they didn't ask how I was. They didn't apologize for the past. They demanded it. And when I said no, they told me I wasn't family anymore. I looked back at my father. He was purple with rage, but his mouth wouldn't move. I am not selfish, I said, my words like cold iron. I am the consequence of your choices. You taught me how to survive without you. Don't be surprised that I'm good at it. I turned and walked out. I didn't look at Ryan. I didn't look at my mother's tears. I walked out into the night air, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter. I felt like a woman who was finally, truly, whole. 2 days later, they tried one last time. They didn't come to apologize. They came to my office, the glass tower I built with the hands they refused to hold. My father didn't wait for the receptionist. He slammed my door open. You humiliated us. You ruined Ryan's reputation with the Madisons. They're looking at us like we're grifters. Aren't you? I asked, not looking up from my screen. My mother was shaking. We raised you. We gave you life. And you almost let me lose it for $10,000, I replied. Please leave. If you don't, I will have security remove you. You wouldn't dare, my father hissed. I pressed the button. 3 minutes later, the man who thought he owned me was being escorted out of my building by men I paid. As the elevator doors closed on his screaming face, I realized that the $500,000 they wanted wasn't for a wedding. It was the price they were willing to pay to keep me under their thumb. I hired a lawyer that afternoon. No more phone calls, no more accidental run-ins. My boundaries aren't suggestions anymore. They are legal requirements. People ask me if I feel guilty. They say, but they're your parents. And I tell them, love that requires your silence, your money, or your self-destruction isn't love. It's a transaction, and I'm closed for business. I didn't abandon my family. I stopped abandoning myself. And in the silence of my new life, I finally found the one thing money could never buy for Ryan: